The sun was falling slow behind the low red hills, flattening every shadow across the sand. The wind carried grit that stung the eyes and filled every fold of a coat. Elias Kane rode in silence, one hand resting on the reins, the other keeping his hat low against the glare. His throat was dry, his canteen near empty, but he'd ridden through worse. The desert stretched out ahead like it would never end. No sound but the horse's hooves sinking into soft sand and the squeak of worn leather with each step. He wasn't sure what kept him moving anymore. Maybe habit. Maybe the thought of a quiet town where nobody knew his name. Then he saw something off the trail, a wagon tilted on its side, one wheel broken clean off. He slowed the horse, scanning the horizon. Nothing but heat waves. No smoke, no vultures yet. The kind of silence that made a man's skin crawl. He swung down, boots crunching over glass and splintered wood. The back of the wagon had been torn open, crates scattered, canvas ripped. Whatever happened here hadn't been long ago. He crouched, ran a hand along a set of small footprints leading away into the sand. One of them dragged a little, like someone limping. "Damn," he muttered. He followed the prints about 20 yards before seeing a small shape lying still on the ground. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9, face buried in the sand, shirt torn at the shoulder. Elias knelt, turned him over carefully. The kid's lips were split from dryness, his eyelids fluttering. He was breathing, shallow but there. Elias felt a tight pull in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pity maybe. Or the memory of something he'd once cared about and lost. He pulled the canteen from his belt, unscrewed the cap and held it to the boy's mouth. The kid coughed, then drank fast, water spilling down his chin. "Easy," Elias said, steadying the canteen. "Slow down, kid. There's more where that came from." The boy's voice came out thin. "Matama. She went to get help." Elias looked at the tracks again. They led north, out into emptiness. No town that way for at least 10 miles. He hesitated, glanced toward the lowering sun. Night would bring cold, maybe worse. He didn't like getting involved. Not anymore. Every time he did, it went bad. But leaving a kid to die in the sand wasn't something even a tired man could justify. He sighed, hooked an arm under the boy and lifted him onto the saddle. The horse shifted but stayed calm. Elias mounted behind, keeping the boy steady against his chest. "Hold on best you can," he said. The boy's small hands gripped his sleeve weakly. Elias clicked his tongue and the horse started forward, slow at first, then into a steady rhythm. As they rode, the boy's breathing steadied. He fell asleep against Elias's chest, and the weight of him felt strange, light but heavy in meaning. Elias tried not to think about it. Tried not to think about the last time he'd carried someone small like that, someone who hadn't made it through a winter storm years ago. He focused on the horizon. By dusk, faint lights appeared, a scatter of lanterns marking a small town. Raven's Hollow, the sign read, paint peeling, one hinge broken so it swung in the wind. The main street was quiet. A few men outside the saloon stopped talking when Elias rode by. He ignored them, guided the horse down a dirt lane until the boy stirred and pointed toward a small house at the edge of town. "There," he said weakly. Elias stopped outside the fence. The house looked like it hadn't seen paint in years. Porch steps leaning, roof patched with tin. A woman burst from the doorway the second she saw them, her face pale in the lantern light. "Tommy," she cried. She ran barefoot through the dust. Elias dismounted and handed the boy down gently. "He was by the wagon," Elias said, voice calm, steady. "Dehydrated, but he'll be all right." She clutched her son close, whispering his name, touching his face like she didn't believe he was real. The boy tried to speak but she hushed him, tears streaking the dirt on her cheeks. Elias looked away, gave them a moment. He felt something twist inside, not quite jealousy, not quite sorrow, just the ache of seeing something he didn't have anymore. She turned to him finally, eyes red. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." He shifted his weight, thumb resting on his belt buckle. "Elias Kane." "I'm Clara," she said quietly. "Clara Wren." He nodded, gave the boy a brief look. "Keep him inside tonight. He'll need rest and water." Clara nodded, her voice unsteady. "I will. I can't thank you enough." Elias stepped back, tugged the reins. "No need." As he rode away, he glanced back once. The woman stood in the doorway holding the boy close, both framed by the flicker of lamplight. It was a sight that would stick with him longer than he wanted. He found the livery at the far end of town, gave the horse feed, laid out his bedroll in the corner. When he finally sat down, the night air cooled his skin, but his mind stayed restless. He told himself he'd leave in the morning. He told himself he'd done enough. But when he closed his eyes, he saw that kid lying in the sand again, and the look on the woman's face when she saw him alive. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The wind had died down by the time Elias Kane walked into Raven's Hollow Saloon. The wooden doors creaked behind him, the sound loud in the quiet room. Inside, a few men were hunched over tables, their faces half hidden by cigarette smoke and the dim light of oil lamps. A piano in the corner sat untouched, its keys covered in dust. Elias kept his hat low, scanning the room. He'd been in enough places like this to know when trouble was looking his way. A few pairs of eyes followed him, long silent stares that said, "You don't belong here." He walked up to the bar. The barkeep, a heavy man with gray stubble and a stained apron, wiped his hands on a rag and stepped closer. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey," Elias said. His voice came out flat, tired. The man poured a shot and slid it across the counter. Elias caught it, took a slow sip. The burn hit the back of his throat, sharp but familiar. For a second it steadied him. He didn't drink for comfort anymore, not really. Just enough to stay alert, to push the edge off the noise inside his head. The memory of that boy lying in the sand was still fresh, replaying without asking permission. He didn't like how much it had affected him. He set the glass down and spoke quietly. "Wagon broke down a few miles out. Looked like an ambush. You heard anything?" The barkeep frowned. "Ambush? Out here? Not lately. Closest thing we've had to trouble was a couple of drifters shooting up the livery 2 weeks back." Elias watched his face, the small pauses between his words. The man didn't seem to be lying. "Anyone new passed through recently?" Elias asked. The barkeep shrugged. "Always someone new. Prospectors, ranch hands, deserters. Hard to tell who's who anymore." Elias nodded, finished his drink and left a few coins on the counter. He didn't expect answers tonight. As he turned to leave, a man at the corner table spoke. "You the one brought that boy in?" His tone wasn't friendly, more like curiosity mixed with suspicion. Elias stopped. "You got a reason for asking?" The man leaned back in his chair. His clothes were dusty, the kind worn by men who spent days on horseback. "Depends. Folks don't usually ride into town with half-dead kids unless there's a story behind it." Elias met his eyes. "There's no story. Just bad luck." The man smirked. "That's what we all say." Elias held his stare for a long moment. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he'd had enough nights end in blood to know when one was coming. The man didn't push further though. He just watched, testing him, then went back to his drink. Elias stepped outside. The air was cold now, the kind that carried sound clearly. Somewhere down the street, a door slammed. A dog barked once, then went quiet. He stood there for a minute, breathing in the smell of dust and smoke. He wanted to keep walking, to get back on his horse, ride out before dawn, and leave this place behind. But something made him hesitate. He thought of the woman, Clara, holding her son at the doorway. There'd been real fear in her eyes, not just worry. She hadn't looked like someone who believed the worst was over. Elias walked toward the small house at the edge of town. The windows glowed faintly from the oil lamp inside. He stopped at the fence, listening. The night was still. Then, a sound. Not from inside the house, but from beyond it. A creak of wood. A muffled thud. Someone moving around where they shouldn't be. Elias's hand went to the revolver at his hip. He drew it slow, thumb resting on the hammer. His pulse picked up, steady but strong. He moved toward the noise, keeping to the shadows. Behind the house, near the broken fence line, he saw movement. A figure crouched low, trying to stay hidden. Elias leveled the gun. "Stand up," he said quietly. The figure froze. Then slowly, a man rose to his feet, hands half raised. His face caught the light, thin, rough, with a scar across his chin. "Easy," the man said. "Ain't looking for trouble." "Then you shouldn't be sneaking around someone's home," Elias said. The man smiled nervously. "Didn't mean no harm. Just looking to see if the wagon folks made it here. I was on the trail earlier, saw the wreck. Thought maybe they'd need help." Elias didn't lower the gun. "You see who hit them?" The man hesitated just long enough to make Elias uneasy. "Bandits, I think. 3 of them. Maybe 4. Couldn't see much, dust kicked up bad." Elias studied his eyes. The story didn't sit right. "Where's your horse?" Elias asked. Back in the scrub. You ride out here alone?" The man nodded quickly, too quickly. Elias stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Jeb." "Last name?" "Does it matter?" "It does to me." The man's smile faded. He glanced toward the open desert. Elias saw the shift in his stance, the slight bend of knees, the tensing of muscle. Don't, Elias warned. The man bolted anyway. Elias fired once, not to kill but to stop. The bullet hit the dirt by the man's boots. He stumbled, fell, scrambled up again and disappeared into the dark. Elias didn't chase him. He lowered the gun, listening to the fading sound of footsteps. Whoever that man was, he'd come for something, and it wasn't to check on survivors. He walked back to the house. Through the window, he saw Clara sitting beside her son's bed, brushing his hair back with gentle hands. The boy was asleep, face peaceful now. Elias holstered the gun, leaned on the fence for a long moment, thinking. He could walk away, pretend none of this concerned him. But his gut told him the man would be back. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not alone next time. He let out a slow breath and looked at the horizon, where the desert faded into black. The kind of black that hid both danger and answers. Looks like I'm staying one more night, he muttered to himself. He turned and walked back toward town, already planning where to keep watch till morning. Sleep could wait. The first light of morning came weak and colorless over Raven's Hollow. The air was still cold, the kind that bit at the skin and made every sound feel sharper. Elias Kane stood near the edge of town, watching the sun come up from behind the low ridge. He hadn't slept. His coat was dusted with the night's chill, and his eyes were drawn and heavy. He'd spent most of the dark hours circling the outskirts, checking for tracks, watching shadows move between buildings. He found some hoof prints in the dirt, 3 sets heading south, but they were half erased by wind and wagon wheels. Whoever Jeb was, he hadn't come alone. Elias rubbed his jaw, feeling the roughness of stubble under his palm. He didn't like guessing. Guessing got people killed. From the main street came the slow rhythm of boots on wood. The town was waking. A few shopkeepers opened their doors, brushing dust from thresholds. The sound of a hammer came from the blacksmith's shed. Everyday noise, ordinary, harmless, but Elias's mind stayed fixed on what he'd seen behind that house. He walked toward Clara's home, each step slow, deliberate. He didn't want to alarm her, but he needed answers. When he knocked, she opened the door halfway. Her hair was tied loosely, her dress wrinkled, eyes tired but alert. "You've been up," she said quietly. "Didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." Elias nodded, removing his hat. "You all right?" "I am. Sam's resting." She hesitated before stepping aside. "You can come in if you like." Inside the air was warmer, the smell of boiled coffee faint in the corner. The boy lay under a wool blanket, his face pale but calm. Clara poured a tin cup and handed it to Elias. He took it, nodding once. "Someone was outside last night. Behind your house." Her hands froze mid-motion. "Outside." Tall man, scar on his chin. Said his name was Jeb. Claimed he came to help, but ran when I pressed him. Fear flickered in her face, small, controlled, but visible. She set down the kettle, her knuckles whitening. "Did he see me? Did he see Sam?" Elias shook his head. "Don't think so. But he'll be back. They don't risk sneaking near a house unless they're after something." Clara looked down at her son. "They already took everything from us," she whispered. "What were they after on that trail?" Elias asked. She looked at him, uncertain, torn between silence and trust. He could see her working through it, whether to tell him or send him away. Finally she spoke. "My husband was hauling medical supplies from Fort Mason. Morphine, quinine, things soldiers need. There was money in it, more than most men see in a lifetime. The wagons were supposed to meet a buyer in Silver Rock. We never made it." Elias's jaw tightened. "Your husband?" She lowered her gaze. "He didn't make it past the ridge. I buried him there." He said nothing for a while. The room felt smaller, quieter. The weight of her words hung there, solid and final. After a few moments he said, "Then whoever attacked you still wants that cargo. They think you know where it is." Clara nodded faintly. "I don't. I burned what was left. I didn't want them to find it." Elias took a long breath, his mind already moving. "If that's true, they'll come looking to be sure." "What do we do?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the fear beneath it. "You pack what you need. I'll take you somewhere safe." "I can't just run." "You can," he said, firm but calm. "I've seen men like Jeb before. They don't leave witnesses." She turned away, struggling with it. He could see her shoulders tense, her hand gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles turned pale. "I can't leave my husband's grave behind," she said quietly. Elias stepped closer. "He'd rather you and your boy live than join him in the dirt." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that made both of them aware of how close they were standing. She finally looked up at him, eyes sharp, searching his face. There was something unspoken there, not just fear but trust beginning to take shape. He saw it too and forced himself to step back a little. "I'll get the horses ready," he said. As he turned for the door, she stopped him. "Elias." He looked back. "Why are you helping us?" He hesitated, eyes on her for a long second. "Because no one helped me when I needed it." Outside, the street had brightened. The saloon doors swung open, voices spilling out, laughter, boots, the clatter of glass. Elias walked past without looking. His mind was already working through routes and timing. By noon they could make it through the South Pass. If they moved fast, they'd be past the ridge before nightfall. But he knew Jeb wouldn't wait that long. He tightened his belt, checked his revolver, then headed to the stable. His hands worked with practiced precision, checking saddles, tightening straps, but his thoughts drifted. He didn't like being pulled into other people's lives. It never ended clean. But something about Clara, the way she'd looked at him when she said her husband's name, made it harder to walk away. When he led the horses out, he caught a glimpse of her through the open door, wrapping a blanket around her son. The boy stirred and smiled faintly in his sleep. For a brief second, Elias let himself imagine this wasn't temporary, that he wasn't always the man leaving before dawn. Then he pushed the thought aside. He'd chosen a life that didn't leave room for that. He mounted up, eyes scanning the road ahead. The sun was higher now, cutting through the haze. Somewhere out in that desert, men were waiting, men with guns, questions, and unfinished business. And this time he wasn't just riding for himself. He touched the brim of his hat, looked once more toward the house, then nudged his horse forward. The sound of hooves broke the morning calm as he rode toward the ridge, where dust and danger waited beyond the line of sunlight. The morning heat came earlier than expected. By the time Elias tightened the cinch on his saddle, sweat was already collecting at his collar. Clara stood near the porch with a small bag clutched to her chest, her eyes following every movement he made. The boy, Sam, leaned against the doorway, pale but awake, watching quietly. "Stay close to me on the trail," Elias said, his voice low but firm. "If anything happens, you take Sam and ride for the creek bend. Don't stop, don't turn around." Clara gave a single nod. She was dressed in a simple riding skirt and a loose white blouse rolled to the elbows. There was no trace of fear on her face, but her breathing told another story, shallow and uneven. Elias lifted Sam onto the smaller horse, tied their bags down and mounted his own. He took one last look at the house before they left. The windows reflected the sunlight, empty and still. It would probably be ransacked by nightfall. They rode in silence for most of the morning. The only sounds were the horses' hooves striking the dry earth and the soft creak of leather. The open land spread endlessly around them, nothing but brush, rock, and a line of mountains far ahead. Clara's hands were steady on the reins, but Elias noticed how often she looked back. Every time she turned, her expression changed, calm fading into worry, then quickly masked again. After a while he spoke. "You've ridden before." "My husband taught me," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He said I'd need it one day." Yes, he was right. Elias kept his gaze forward. He sounded like a man who thought ahead. "He was," she replied softly. Then after a pause, "He trusted the wrong people, though." That caught Elias's attention. "You mean the men who took the supplies?" She nodded. "They came to help us fix a broken axle. I didn't see their faces well. One of them had a scar across his hand. I still remember that much." Elias's grip on the reins tightened. "Scar on his hand?" he repeated. "Jeb's got one. Same kind of mark." Clara's breath caught slightly. "Then they're the same men." "Looks that way." He looked back over his shoulder, scanning the distance. The trail behind them was empty, but the desert never stayed empty for long. By midday they stopped near a cluster of boulders where the shade gave some relief. Elias helped Sam down and gave him water. The boy's face was flushed from the heat, but his eyes were alert. Clara knelt beside him, brushing dust from his shirt. Elias stood a few feet away, watching the horizon again. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The land was too still. No birds. No wind. He crouched low, touched the ground, and felt faint tremors, light, rhythmic. Far off but closing. "Get the boy back on the horse," he said quickly. Clara froze for a moment, then obeyed. "How many?" "Can't tell yet. But they're coming fast." She climbed up behind Sam, her hand on his shoulder, eyes wide but focused. Elias swung onto his horse, pulled his rifle from the saddle holster, and scanned the ridge ahead. A flash of movement caught his eye, a rider appearing on the slope, followed by two more. The sun glinted off their guns. 3, he said. Maybe more behind them. Clara's voice shook slightly. Can we outrun them? He shook his head. We try that, they'll shoot us down before the next turn. Then what do we do? He looked around quickly, thinking. The terrain offered little cover except for a narrow ravine cutting through the ridge to their right. We take that cut, he said, pointing. It's tight, but they'll have to come in single file. Clara nodded, gripping the reins tighter. They kicked their horses into motion. Dust rose around them as they galloped toward the ravine. The thunder of hooves behind them grew louder, closer. Gunfire cracked through the air. A bullet struck the dirt near Elias's boot, spraying grit into his leg. Another whined past Clara's shoulder, close enough to hear the hiss. Elias turned in the saddle and fired once. The shot dropped one of the riders back down the slope, but 2 kept coming. Keep going, he shouted. They reached the ravine just as another shot echoed. Clara ducked low, clutching Sam tight. The walls closed around them, steep rock, narrow and jagged, but it offered cover. Elias dismounted fast and grabbed the horse's reins. Off the horse, he said. Stay low. Clara slid down, pulling Sam behind a rock. Elias crouched beside them, reloading his rifle. He could hear the echo of hooves outside the ravine, the outlaws calling to each other. Then silence. They'll try to flank us, he muttered. Clara looked at him, her face pale but steady. Can we hold them? He glanced at her, really looked, and saw the fear she was hiding behind calm eyes. He admired that. We can, he said. But if I tell you to run, you take the boy and go. No argument. She nodded. You won't be left behind. He didn't answer, just moved closer to the mouth of the ravine. The first outlaw appeared seconds later, edging along the rock. Elias fired. The man dropped. Another one came from the opposite side, shouting. Elias ducked, fired again, hitting his shoulder. The man fell back, cursing. The last rider tried to circle wide. Elias saw the movement and raised his gun, but Clara's voice cut through the air. Elias, behind you. He turned fast, firing without thinking. The 4th man had come from above, sliding down the rock face with a knife. The shot hit him square in the chest. He collapsed, the sound echoing down the ravine. Then there was nothing but wind and the slow whinny of the horses. Elias stood still for a moment, breathing hard. His hand trembled slightly from the rush, but his voice stayed calm. They're done. Clara exhaled sharply, her knees giving a little. She sat down beside the rock, pulling Sam close. The boy buried his face in her shoulder. Elias lowered his rifle, checked the trail again, then turned toward her. You all right? I think so. Her voice was quiet. You saved us. He shook his head. Not yet. There'll be more coming when they don't return. She looked up at him then, eyes wide with worry and gratitude. You could have left us, she said. I could have, he replied simply. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried something heavy, not fear this time, but something closer, warmer, that neither wanted to name. Finally Elias said, We move when the horses catch their breath. We'll head east to the river. Fewer roads, fewer eyes. Clara nodded slowly, her hand still resting on her son's back. She watched Elias as he reloaded, his movements calm and sure. Every motion, every glance told her he'd lived through worse. When he caught her looking, she looked away quickly, pretending to adjust the saddle. But her heart was still racing, not just from the fight, but from how close he'd been when he fired, how his hand had brushed her arm when he told her to get down. Elias caught the flicker in her expression and turned his eyes back to the trail. He said nothing, but inside he felt it too, the pull that had started back in town, now stronger, harder to ignore. The sun was lowering again, the shadows stretching long across the rocks. They had survived the first chase, but the day wasn't done yet. Elias holstered his gun, gave her a brief look, then said, Let's ride before the next storm finds us. She stood, dusted her skirt, and climbed back into the saddle. The boy was quiet, clutching her waist. Elias mounted up beside them. As they rode east, the wind carried the smell of gunpowder and sweat. Behind them, the ridge lay silent, but Elias knew silence never lasted long in places like this. Still, for now they were alive, and together on the trail. The wind picked up around sundown, rattling the loose wood planks along the side of the house. James sat at the small kitchen table, the lantern light casting sharp edges across his face. The table was cluttered, half-drunk coffee, a box of bullets, a folded note he hadn't dared open again. Across from him, Emily sat quietly, her son's head resting on her lap. The boy was asleep, his face calm in a way that made James's chest tighten. It had been years since he'd seen that kind of peace in anyone. He looked at the boy, then at Emily. Her hands were trembling slightly as she brushed the hair off her son's forehead. She was doing her best to act composed, but the tension in her shoulders gave her away. James could feel the fear pressing on her. Fear that the men who'd been tracking them would show up before dawn. He checked the rifle leaning against the wall. The chamber was clean, the barrel oiled. He'd checked it 3 times already, but habit kept pulling him back to it. The silence between them felt heavy, almost unbearable. "Storm's coming," he said finally, not looking up. His voice sounded low and tired. Emily nodded. "You think they'll come tonight?" He exhaled slowly through his nose. "If they're close enough, yeah. Men like that don't wait long once they pick up a trail." For a moment neither spoke. The sound of the wind grew stronger, pushing against the windows. The boy shifted in his sleep, and Emily instinctively pulled him closer. James caught that small movement, protective, reflexive, and it made something stir in him. He'd seen enough mothers bury their sons to know that kind of love could break a person. And part of him hated himself for bringing that danger here. "I should have left you two in town," he said almost under his breath. Emily looked up sharply. "And what? Have them find us there instead?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "You did the right thing. You wanted to believe that." But as he stared out through the rain-specked window, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe all he'd done was postpone the inevitable. When the lantern flickered, Emily's eyes darted to it. "You got enough oil for the night?" "Yeah," he said, pushing his chair back. "Gonna check the barn again. Make sure the horses are calm." He grabbed his coat from the hook and stepped outside. The cold air hit him hard, sharp against his face. The yard was washed in dim light from the lantern hanging on the porch. The barn stood like a dark shape against the fading sky. Inside, the horses were restless. He ran a hand along one's neck, whispering under his breath until it settled. The smell of hay and dust filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of rain blowing in. He stood there for a moment, listening, to the creak of wood, to his own pulse in his ears. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who'd have ridden out alone to deal with trouble, no questions asked. Now, with a child asleep inside and a woman counting on him, every decision carried more weight. He wasn't just thinking about survival anymore. He was thinking about what came after, if there was an after. A distant crack echoed through the hills. He froze, hand tightening around the rifle's grip. Could have been thunder. Could have been something else. He stepped back outside, scanning the dark horizon. The air had changed, denser, charged. He couldn't see much past the fence, but he felt it. That crawling unease in his gut that always came before things went bad. When he went back into the house, Emily was standing by the window, holding the lantern. "You heard it too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Could be thunder. Or not." He looked at her, then at the boy still sleeping on the couch. For a second he envied the kid's ignorance. He wished he could protect it. "We'll keep quiet," James said. "Lights low. I'll stay by the door." Emily hesitated, then set the lantern down and went to sit beside her son again. James sat near the door, rifle resting across his knees. The sound of the wind filled the room, and every few seconds, the wood creaked like footsteps somewhere too close. He told himself it was just the wind. But he didn't really believe it. And as the first rumble of thunder, or maybe gunfire, rolled across the night, he felt that same cold certainty he'd carried through every bad night before. Something was coming, and this time he wasn't sure they'd all make it through. The first light of dawn bled weakly through the cracks in the barn walls. Elias Kane was awake before it, sitting on a stack of hay, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the thin line of horizon. His coat was streaked with dust, sweat, and the residue of gunpowder from last night's ambush. He kept replaying the sounds in his head. The horses panicked, the men shouting, the ricochet of bullets against the rock wall, and his chest still tightened at the memory. He could hear Clara moving inside the house, her steps cautious. When he peeked through the barn door, he saw her by the window holding Sam close, looking out at the ridge. Her shoulders were tense, her face drawn. She didn't speak, she hadn't slept much either. Elias could tell from the dark circles under her eyes, from the way her fingers gripped the boy's jacket like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. He lowered himself from the haystack and stepped toward the house, careful not to make a sound. Every instinct told him to move slowly, check corners, stay ready. He wasn't just thinking about the men who'd attacked them last night, he was thinking about what it would mean if more were coming. Inside, Clara looked up at him as he entered. Her eyes were wide but steady. "They're gone," she said, voice low. "I don't see anyone." Elias nodded but didn't lower his guard. For now. But we can't assume. She brushed a strand of hair from Sam's forehead. He's asleep again. That's good, he said. He studied the boy for a moment, noticing how peaceful he looked despite everything. Elias thought about how fragile that peace was, how quickly it could be shattered if the wrong person found them. He hated the thought of Sam being hurt because of him. Clara's eyes met his. You saved him, she said quietly. I just did what had to be done, he replied, voice rough, controlled. She didn't push, didn't argue. She just nodded, letting the statement hang between them. Elias could feel the weight of the unspoken words. Gratitude, fear, something more. Something neither of them wanted to say out loud yet. Outside, the wind stirred the dust. Elias moved toward the porch, scanning the horizon again. Last night's battle had left tracks, footprints, hoof prints, and debris from the outlaws' camp. He squatted, inspecting them, calculating their numbers and direction. Only 3 had returned after the ambush, but there might be more in the hills. His mind went over options. Move east toward the river, hide further in the brush, or risk going back to town for supplies. Each choice carried danger. Every second wasted made it more likely someone would find them. He felt the old familiar tension in his chest, the edge of adrenaline that never fully left him after a fight. Clara approached, standing quietly beside him. Her hand brushed his as she adjusted her son in the saddle. Elias felt the brief contact and caught himself, heart rate increasing. He looked away quickly, forcing his attention back to the tracks. He couldn't let himself think about more than the immediate danger. We should move, he said finally. Before anyone comes looking. She nodded, eyes on the horizon. Do you think they'll come back? Yes, he said without hesitation. If they know we survived, they'll come back. But we'll be ready. He walked back inside, grabbing the pack with supplies he'd hidden the night before. Food, water, bandages, and a few extra cartridges. His movements were methodical, controlled. Every muscle in his body tensed for the possibility of another confrontation. Clara followed him out, her hand brushing against his briefly as she helped him lift the pack onto Sam's horse. The contact was fleeting, but Elias noticed. His chest tightened again and he forced himself to focus on the trail. They mounted, and Elias led them down the ridge road cautiously, scanning the hills on either side. Every rock, every shadow felt like it could conceal an ambush. He made slow, deliberate decisions. When to speed up, when to let the horses rest, which path through the scrub would offer the most cover. Sam shifted in the saddle, letting out a small yawn. Elias glanced at him and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. He remembered the boy in the desert, weak, dehydrated, terrified. And now he was here, almost safe, almost whole, and Elias was determined to keep him that way. Clara rode a few feet behind him, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Elias noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip on the reins tightened every time a bird took flight, every time a branch snapped under a distant animal. He could feel her fear, and it made him more alert, more aware of his own vulnerability. By mid-morning they reached a narrow pass that led down toward the river. The terrain was rough, rocky, but offered some concealment. Elias slowed the horses, scanning every crevice. He thought about how long they could stay ahead of anyone following. How far they could run before exhaustion and hunger caught up with them. You'll be safe here for a while, he said to Clara, pointing toward the trees along the riverbank. We can set up a temporary camp. Rest, eat, clean the guns, and figure out the next move. She nodded, eyes softening just slightly. For the first time since the attack, Elias saw a hint of relief in her expression. As the horses moved down into the cover of the trees, Elias rode beside Clara and Sam. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease just a fraction. Not much, but enough to notice the quiet between them, the way her hand occasionally brushed against his as she adjusted Sam. He caught himself wanting more, closer, more than just the fleeting contact. But he didn't act. Not yet. There was still too much at stake. Survival came first. And yet, as they set up the small camp near the river, Elias found himself stealing glances at Clara, feeling the pull between them stronger than it had been in the barn, in the desert, in the moments between gunfire and fear. Every quiet moment carried that tension now, charged, dangerous, impossible to ignore. He cleaned his rifle methodically, listening to the river's soft rush, letting himself notice the small details. The curve of Clara's jaw as she watched Sam, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Elias knew he couldn't allow himself to act on it yet. But he also knew he couldn't ignore it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the fear, beneath the strategy, beneath the exhaustion, he realized he wanted to protect more than just the boy. He wanted to protect her. Tonight, the river would give them cover. But tomorrow the real challenge would come, and nothing would be the same. The river ran low and slow, a silver ribbon cutting through the green of the valley floor. Elias Kane and Clara Wren had made camp on a flat stretch of sand and grass, just enough to keep Sam close while giving themselves some cover behind the river's bend. The sun had almost set, leaving the sky pale blue with streaks of gold along the horizon. Elias knelt beside the small fire he had coaxed from damp kindling, checking the rifle again, running the barrel clean with methodical precision. Every sound, the water lapping, a bird calling, a branch snapping in the underbrush, kept him alert. He thought about the ridge attack, about the men who would surely follow. His chest was tight with anticipation, but he had to control it. Clara and Sam depended on him. Clara crouched near the boy, rinsing his face in the river. Sam's small hands splashed lightly, oblivious to the tension in the air. She looked up briefly, meeting Elias's gaze. Her eyes held gratitude, yes, but also something heavier, something that made the weight in his chest grow tighter. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, her voice carrying over the water. Elias didn't look at her. "Couldn't leave you alone. Not with them out there." His voice was low, steady, but his knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. He wanted to reach out to brush the hair from her face, but he held himself back. There was danger enough without adding a distraction. Clara glanced at him again. He noticed the way her hand lingered on Sam's shoulder, how her body tensed when a sudden gust of wind ruffled her skirt. Every subtle movement spoke of control, restraint, awareness. He admired it, even as he felt the pull between them stronger than before. The boy yawned, leaning against her side. Elias's eyes softened for just a moment. Protecting him felt easier than protecting her, but protecting her mattered more than he wanted to admit. He checked the perimeter of the camp silently, walking along the river's edge. He studied the terrain, trees, rocks, shadows, every possible route an enemy could take. The fear of another ambush weighed on him, but so did the knowledge that this was the only place with enough cover to stand a chance. Clara watched him. She could see the tension in his jaw, the tight grip on the rifle, the way his eyes flicked to every movement, every sound. She wanted to speak, to break the quiet, but she hesitated. She wasn't sure if words would help or make him more tense. Instead, she sat closer to Sam, letting the boy rest his head on her lap, feeling the warmth of his small body. "Elias," she said finally, testing the word. He looked at her, sharp, alert. "What is it?" Her hand hovered near his arm, then fell back. You can't do this alone, you know. Not always." He exhaled slowly, eyes returning to the river. "I know, but I have to try. I don't get a choice in what comes next." Her gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not. But you're not the only one who can act. Let me help." Elias's shoulders stiffened, but only slightly. He wanted to tell her to step back to protect herself, but he also wanted her near. That desire pulled against his instincts, creating a tension he couldn't ignore. He forced himself to stand straight, voice firm. "Stay close, but do only what's safe." "Understood." She nodded, and he saw the determination in her eyes, the same determination that had carried her through the ridge attack. She wasn't just a woman to protect. She was someone capable, someone who could think, act, and survive alongside him. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the sand and into the river. Elias returned to the fire, checking the supplies. The bandages were ready, water carried in a leather canteen, and extra cartridges loaded. Every detail mattered, and he went over them with a quiet intensity. Clara moved closer, sitting down across from him. Their knees brushed lightly, a subtle contact that sent a pulse of awareness through both of them. Neither spoke immediately. Instead, they shared the space quietly, the firelight flickering across their faces. Finally, she said, "You don't have to protect me like I'm a child." He glanced at her, caught her eyes. "I'm not protecting you like that." "Then what is it?" Her voice dropped, soft but pointed. Elias didn't answer. He looked down at the fire, then back at her, realizing he didn't know how to put it into words. It wasn't just fear or responsibility. It was something else, something unspoken that had been building since the desert, since the barn, since every moment he'd watched her work, speak, and care for Sam. The contact of their knees, the proximity of their bodies, the shared silence, it all carried a weight heavier than any gunfire, more dangerous than any ambush. He finally spoke, voice low, measured. "It's complicated. Too much at stake." She nodded, understanding more in the pause than any words could convey. "I know." They sat together as the light faded, the fire small but steady. Sam slept between them, unaware of the tension in the air. Elias kept the rifle within reach, muscles coiled, eyes scanning, but he stole glances at Clara when he thought she wasn't looking. Every small movement, how she brushed hair from her face, how her hand adjusted the blanket over Sam, made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't control. He wasn't sure when the danger would return, wasn't sure what they'd face in the coming hours. But for now, the river held them, the fire kept them warm, and for a brief moment, they could exist in this fragile bubble of safety and proximity. And that proximity made everything harder to ignore. The tension, the unspoken desire, the fear, and the hope that maybe, against all odds, they could survive together. The night would come, and with it, the decisions that could not be postponed. But until then, Elias allowed himself the smallest acknowledgement of what he wanted, what he was starting to feel for Clara, and it was enough to keep him moving forward. The sky was pale gray when Elias Kane woke, alert before the sun had fully risen. The camp by the river was quiet except for the gentle murmur of water over rocks and the occasional shuffle of Sam in his small blanket. Elias's body was tense, every muscle coiled, but his eyes were calm and deliberate. He had checked the rifle 3 times before rising, running his hands over the worn wood, the cold steel, and imagining every possible angle of attack. Clara Wren was already awake, kneeling beside Sam, brushing the dust from his hair and adjusting his jacket. When she noticed Elias watching, she didn't flinch or look away. Instead, she met his gaze with steady eyes, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Elias felt a small, unexpected heat in his chest. He wanted to reach for her, to steady her, but restraint kept him rooted in focus. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We move now. The ridge is clear for the first mile, but it narrows. That's where they'll try to cut us off." Clara nodded without hesitation. "I'm ready." Her voice carried more than readiness, it carried trust. The thought tightened something deep in Elias, making him aware of how much he wanted to protect her, not just from bullets or outlaws, but from the weight of everything that had followed them since the desert. They mounted, Sam between them, gripping both their hands on the reins. Elias led the way, keeping the horses slow but deliberate, eyes scanning the horizon, listening for the smallest disturbance. His mind ran through contingencies. Flankers, ambush from the trees, surprise shots from above. Every decision had consequences. About halfway up the ridge, movement caught his attention. 3 figures appeared, partially obscured by trees at the ridge's crest. Elias froze, hand tightening on the reins, heart steady but pulse quickening. He gestured to Clara, who leaned close, listening. He could see her jaw tense, her eyes flicking to his, reading his reaction without words. "They're trying to scare us, but they won't wait," he muttered. "Get Sam low." She leaned forward, guiding the boy's small body closer to the horse. Elias raised his rifle just enough to cover the slope. A single shot rang out, kicking up dust near the lead outlaw. The other 2 ducked behind rocks, shouting. Elias didn't hesitate. He fired again, hitting one in the shoulder. The man fell back, groaning, dragging himself out of view. The 3rd attempted a flanking move, but Elias anticipated it, spinning the rifle and firing just as the man rose from cover. The shot clipped his leg and he collapsed with a curse. Clara exhaled sharply beside him. Her hands were trembling slightly on Sam's small frame, but she stayed focused, her body taut, ready to move at Elias's command. He noticed the fine line between her fear and her courage, and it strengthened his resolve. "Mount up," he said. "We finish this ridge and then we ride the river trail east. Less open ground, fewer chances to be followed." They rode on, dust swirling around the horses' hooves. Elias kept scanning every ridge, every tree line, every shadow that might conceal another threat. Clara stayed close behind, eyes shifting constantly, hand brushing the boy and then her own reins, never leaving him entirely. Every small movement carried weight, the tension between them growing with each step, unspoken but palpable. Halfway down the next stretch, a final figure appeared. Silas Crow, Elias's former gang leader, riding fast, pistol in hand. His red bandana flapped in the wind, and his smile was cruel, confident. Elias froze for a moment, assessing distance and angles. He could see Clara tense, but she didn't panic. "You should have stayed gone, Kane," Silas shouted, gun raised. Elias didn't answer. He guided the horses to a slight dip, using the terrain for cover, then fired a warning shot just over Silas's shoulder. The crack of the rifle echoed and Silas slowed, swearing. Clara's hand brushed Elias's arm briefly as she leaned in, steadying herself against the horse. The contact was fleeting but electric, grounding Elias, reminding him of why he was here. Protecting her wasn't optional, it was personal now. He aimed again, this time with precision. The shot hit Silas's horse in the flank, throwing the man off balance and forcing him to reel back. Elias didn't fire again. He watched as Silas regrouped, realizing the advantage was gone. The remaining gang members, scattered and injured, called out to retreat. Elias exhaled slowly, keeping his eyes on the ridge until every movement stopped. Then he turned to Clara, scanning her face, searching for the relief he felt but couldn't yet express. "Are you both all right?" he asked. She nodded, pulling Sam close. Her hand brushed his again, not out of caution but acknowledgement. Something unspoken passed between them. The danger was over and they had survived. Together. Elias dismounted, letting his hand linger on Sam's small shoulder before brushing Clara's hair from her forehead. "It's over," he said simply. Clara's eyes softened, and she allowed herself a small, steadying laugh. "I wasn't sure we'd make it." He shook his head, a hint of a smile breaking through his stoic expression. "Neither was I." For a long moment they stood close, the boys sleeping safely between them, the ridge quiet except for the river's flow. Elias reached for her hand, holding it firmly but gently. She didn't pull away. "Stay with me," he said, voice low, steady. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied. Her fingers tightened around his. They mounted together, Elias leading them down the river trail, the early sunlight painting the world in sharp, clear light. For the first time in weeks, the path ahead felt safe, their steps measured, deliberate. The weight of fear had lifted, replaced by something heavier but warmer. Trust, closeness, and the beginning of something neither had dared hope for. Elias glanced at Clara, her hair catching the morning light, her posture alert but relaxed. He let himself feel it, the relief, the desire, the pull that had grown since the desert. And when she met his eyes, holding that quiet, steady look, he finally allowed a small smile to break through, the first real smile in days. They rode in silence, but it was a silence full of understanding. Sam leaned between them, safe, and Elias felt the first true sense of peace he'd had in a long time. By the time the sun climbed fully, they had reached a sheltered grove along the riverbank. Elias dismounted, helping Clara and Sam down. She rested a hand briefly on his arm as she stepped off the horse. He felt it, and this time he didn't pull away. The world was quiet around them, the danger behind them, the horizon open ahead. And for the first time, Elias allowed himself to imagine a life that wasn't just survival. A life with her, with Sam, together. Clara looked at him, and without hesitation she closed the distance, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Elias leaned down, brushing her hair from her face again, this time letting his lips meet hers. The kiss was brief, deliberate, and careful, but it carried everything unspoken: relief, desire, gratitude, and the promise of a future. When they pulled back slightly, both were smiling faintly, breathing steady, the warmth of the moment grounding them after all the chaos. "Let's stay here for a while," Elias said, voice low but certain. She nodded. For a long while. They watched the river together, Sam safe between them, the early morning sun casting light over a valley that finally felt free of shadows. The chase was over. The danger was behind them. And for the first time they could just be together, alive, whole, and finally at peace. The story had come to its end. They had survived and they had found each other.